everybody, welcome back to another video. This should be a fairly short one where I'm just going through the introduction to our course reader, introducing really the topic that we're going to be examining in this course. I think E.D. Klemke, the original editor of the text, does a fairly nice job in laying out what the topic is in this short introduction. He also points to a couple of the other pieces we're going to wind up reading in this course, one by Tolstoy, one by Camus. So we're going to take a look at that here, and then I'm going to be really posting videos on each of the different readings that we're going through. Some of those videos might look at more than one reading at a time, if that makes sense. A few of them are fairly short and fit together in a very neat little package. For longer pieces, I'll try to make the videos separate so that it's just a little bit easier to navigate them and sort of break up your time. You know, if you see a half hour or 45-minute video, that might be a little bit easier to say, okay, I need to set aside this much time to get through that, rather than something that's 2 hours long that I might want to break up. So with that, let's go ahead and just sort of jump into the introduction here. So this topic, the meaning of life, in some ways it's almost an embarrassing topic to study. It's the kind of question in philosophy that, quite honestly, at least for part of the 20th century, philosophers wanted to distance themselves from in some kind of way, in part because it just seems like the kind of question that you can never really find a really good answer to, an answer that's really going to stand up to scrutiny. And if we want philosophy to be something almost scientific, something that can give us results that are just indisputable in some sense, then it doesn't seem like a good sort of issue to engage in. But as I noted in talking about what philosophy is before, philosophy does serve as a home for some of these perennial questions, questions that can be answered in different sorts of ways, that can be controversial and that not all people are going to agree on. And I think that is something useful. If I didn't, I certainly wouldn't teach a course on the meaning of life. So in this introduction to the reader, the original editor of the text, E.D. Klemke, does well to really explain the nature of the topic and the question, because we can formulate, the question, what's the meaning of life? And so the course, right, really the topic is, well, how do we answer that question? How do we even think about the question, really? So Klemke poses this nice little series of questions. What is the meaning of life? Is there any meaning at all? What's it all about? What is the point of it all? As I think he's making clear in this little series of questions here, when we're talking about the meaning of life, generally speaking, what we're looking for is the meaning of life in general. It's sort of this large issue. When we think about particular issues, we can often answer these sorts of questions about what it means or what the point of it is in a much easier sort of way. So why am I making this video? Oh, well, to give you a little bit more of an introduction to what the topic is and what we're going to be talking about in the course, what's going on in the text and so on. Okay, well, why do that? Why think about this issue at all, or why take the course? I tried to answer some of those questions in some of the other videos I've already posted. But then we get to something like, why engage in life at all, right? Why have a job or a family? Why try to be happy or make money? Those, at some point, we reach a level of generality where we can still ask the questions. We can always pose a new version of the question, all right, but why do that? And it seems like at some point, the answers might give out, or at least the answers might become less satisfactory. This is really what we're engaging with in the course. We're trying to explore, how far can we push these questions of meaning, or what the point of it is, or why it's worth doing or engaging in it all, and see what kind of answers there are available, as well as how to interpret the questions. What constitutes a good sort of answer to these questions? What are the questions really asking for at all? Are they even good questions to ask? Now, Klemke also points to Albert Camus' formulation of this question, which we're going to take a look at this. So I guess sort of general warning for the course as a whole. It might at times seem a little bit depressing. It might, quite honestly, call into question a lot of things you hold valuable and dear to yourself. Now, my goal in the course certainly isn't to somehow shatter your world and make you question everything and fall into an utter despair that you're never going to come out of. But I will, at this point, and especially before I put up this quotation from Camus, give this general sort of blanket warning that what we're going to engage in this course is pretty serious. And if you feel like you're in a particularly fragile emotional or mental state, you may want to reconsider taking the course. I would certainly encourage you to contact me before doing it. I'm not trying to, encourage a lot of people to leave the course. And in some ways, perhaps I've even overblown the importance of what we're doing here or how deeply it might impact you. I know in other sorts of courses and other sorts of disciplines, people taking counseling and so on, you can be engaged with some very serious and personal issues. And so perhaps I'm overstating how important or impactful the things that I do and study and look at in class can be. But I think some of these readings and certainly the topics we're looking at can really strike a chord in people. I know they do with me. I know part of the reason I got interested in this topic in the first place is because it's something that I thought of for quite a long time, particularly as a teenager. I started to think about these things. I was first exposed to philosophy in high school, and they certainly, these sorts of questions pursued me right along. And in fact, the way I live my life now is certainly guided in a large part by the sorts of answers I've settled on to these questions. So I think Klemke's right that really these are important questions. And if we take just what's the meaning of life to be one single question rather than a series of questions, which itself we can wonder about, it is quite possibly the most important question. Perhaps not, but perhaps it is. So coming to Camus, now that I've given somewhat of a long-winded disclaimer for the course as a whole, Camus really formulates it this way. There's but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. Judging whether or not, whether life is or is not worth living, amounts to answering the fundamental question of philosophy. All the rest, whether the world has 3 dimensions, whether the mind has 9 or 12 categories, comes afterwards. So Camus really puts it this way, that the question of, what's the meaning of life is really a question of, is life worth living? Is it worth going through, in a sense, all the motions, all the trouble, right? Living isn't easy. We're going to hear Camus say basically exactly that phrase, and he's going to go on and elaborate it. But living isn't easy. You've got to work, you've got to worry, there's a lot of stress involved. There's certainly some moments of happiness, but there's some real questions. Do those moments of happiness, or even being happy in general, make life worth living? Is there a difference between having a life worth living and having a meaningful life? Is there a difference between leading a good life and a meaningful life? Is there a difference between being a good person and leading a meaningful life? We're going to explore certainly at least some of these connections to some extent and look at different answers to this question. We're going to see a lot of positive answers. So in fact, most of the people we're going to read in this course think that yes, you can have a meaningful life, or in fact, everybody does have a meaningful life, whether they want to or not. We're going to see at least a few people, Camus is going to be one, Schopenhauer's another, who are frankly fairly pessimistic, think that either lives can't be happy overall, they can't be meaningful, can't be valuable, these things might come apart. Most of the people we're going to look at, though, give some kind of positive answer. In fact, Klemke himself certainly does. Now, there are at least 3 different meanings of this question. What is the meaning of life? That Klemke tries to disentangle. And this is really part of the work of philosophy, trying to take, as I've mentioned in earlier videos, things that seem to come together as a package or really closely related to each other and try to tease them apart through good questions and careful distinctions. Say, okay, I know these 2 things seem really similar, but really we can separate them out and see them as different questions or different sorts of subjects that can be answered different sorts of ways, and then see how those pieces fit back together again. So, first meaning of the question. Why does the universe exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is there some plan for the whole universe? Second meaning. Why do humans, in general, exist? Do they exist for some purpose? If so, what is it? Third, why do I exist? Do I exist for some purpose? If so, how am I to find out what it is? If not, how can life have any significance or value? Now, the third, more personal version of the question is usually taken to be the one that really calls for the largest answer when we're thinking about, what's the meaning of life? Generally, people are interested in, what's the meaning of my life? Why am I here? Where am I going? Do I matter? Why do I matter? Does everybody matter, perhaps? But as that last part really shows, these questions really fit together because we're thinking about ourselves on an individual level. Very quickly, we start to think about how we relate to other people, other humans, how we relate to our communities or societies, the human species more generally, say the planet, which of course gets us thinking about the universe as a whole. And this is really part of the power of philosophy and the power of being a reasonable, rational creature like you are, that you can think about these big, sort of lofty subject matters using the power of your own reason. And so we're going to look at answers to really all of these questions and how answers to the various questions can entangle with each other and help formulate answers to each other. Now, just a little bit of extra content trying to motivate some of these questions here. So this is a little video that zooms into the Hubble Extreme Deep Field. This was a picture taken in 2012 by the Hubble Space Telescope, and it contains roughly 5,500 galaxies in it. So everything you see in this picture, in fact, if you access it online and you look at a high definition version, you can really just like zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and everything you see, rather than just being a star, pretty much everything in there is a galaxy, which is, in each galaxy itself contains millions, if not billions of stars. There are billions of galaxies in the universe. So if we really think about it, you know, the universe is old. It's very old, right? Current estimate, something like 13.7 billion years. That estimate might even be a little bit out of date, but you know, let's call it an even 14 billion years. Now, Homo sapiens, our species, humans, have been around for something like 200,000 years. Again, sort of give or take, depends where you want to draw the lines between different steps in the evolutionary process and so on. But if we take 200,000 years as the sort of age of the species, the universe has been around for over 68,000 times longer than the species, right? And of course, if we think about the average lifespan of a human, the species has been around for, you know, hundreds, thousands of times longer than that. So when you think about your own life compared to the age of the universe, it's almost infinitesimally small. The universe is also very large, right? So again, these estimates might be a little bit out of date, but they give you some idea of what it's like. Our galaxy is something like 100 to 1,000 billion stars in our galaxy. And some recent estimates suggest that there are as many galaxies in the universe as there are stars in the Milky Way. So something like 100 to 1,000 billion. So that means there's 10 to the power of 22 to something like 10 to the power of 24 stars in the universe, which you can write out like this, something like 10 sextillion. That's a massive number, right? That's how many stars there are. And then we can think about how many planets circle those stars and how many of those planets might have life on them. We don't know that any yet do, but if I were a betting person, I'd say odds are pretty good, even if it's only 1 in a billion. Well, we can make those numbers work. Now, our own place, my Earth, is this pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan put it quite a number of years ago. When Voyager 1 was leaving our solar system, Sagan asked NASA to turn it around and take a snapshot back looking at Earth. This is the famous picture that results from it, where Earth shows up. I believe it's a single blue pixel, and you can sort of see it in that band of orangey red there. So really, we are quite small. When you think about our whole planet, our whole species, everybody who's ever lived or died, you know, I don't think we have hopes of colonizing space anytime quite soon. But our whole existence as humans is limited in some sense to the Earth. And of course, you know, we're not limited in our thinking, our imagination, and we can look out and we can start to understand all these things. But in terms of our lived experience, we're here. We're in this one very tiny spot. Now, the Earth itself, of course, you know, for our purposes, is quite massive. It's huge. There are billions of humans on it. So we ourselves are really a very small part of a very, very large existence. And we can ask some pretty big questions and expect to find, hopefully, some pretty good answers, but I guess we're going to see what they're like throughout this course. So just taking a look at some of the views and topics we're going to look at. So this is really just on our schedule. We're going to start with some theistic responses. We're going to see this in Tolstoy and Quinn and a couple of other readings as well. Really a view that somehow religion or the existence of God and our relationship to God or the afterlife give our lives some kind of meaning. We're going to take a look at just one piece that reflects on God's importance, right? really asking a lot of good questions, but I don't think really putting out a positive view too much. And it's an interesting piece by Robert Nozick that we're going to look at. After that, we're going to take a look at Confucianism and community. This is put in the theistic section of our reader. Confucianism can be a kind of religion, but it doesn't need to be. But I think that piece really helps draw our attention to our relations to others and why that matters. We're going to look at the afterlife, understood effectively in a kind of secular way, about our own impact on our community and people we know and the world around us after we're gone. Then we're going to think about death and immortality, so the nature of death, what that really means, and whether or not it's really desirable to be immortal. There's an interesting dispute between a couple of authors on that question. So we're going to think about death and immortality, try to define what those things really are, at least in some sense, and explore whether or not they're worthwhile or worth having or really choice-free. Then we're going to take a look at the scientific worldview, as I'm calling it. So one that rejects theism, embraces a secular scientific approach, see what that really gives us. Then we're going to take a look at Buddhism and pessimism. These pair together nicely. Buddhism is certainly sort of, again, from the theistic perspective, but it ties in quite nicely to Arthur Schopenhauer, who is certainly, in some sense, a secular thinker, but echoes a lot of the themes in Buddhism. We're going to take a look at some responses to pessimism and theism together. There's going to be a bit of overlap there with the scientific worldview, but I think we're going to hear some different and novel ideas in that section. Then we're going to take a look at absurdity, which is really a kind of secular view that says our existence is really absurd because we want some kind of meaning, but we can never get it. We're then going to take a look at subjectivity that says, well, we want some kind of personal meaning, and we can have that independent of theism, independent of the existence of God or the gods or any kind of afterlife or immortality. Then we're going to take a look near the end at pluralism and objectivity. These will try to connect having a subjectively meaningful life with certain objective moral properties or qualities. So expand our thinking a little bit from questions just about meaning and what things might mean to us to broader questions about how we ought to live in general. And then lastly, we're going to consider right near the end of the course whether or not this is just a bad sort of question. After taking a look at all these various sorts of responses, we're going to look at a couple of pieces right near the end that really calls into question the question itself. You know, is this question, what is the meaning of life, a question really worth asking? Can we expect to get any kind of good answer out of it? I'm not sure, and really, I'm not here to try to push one of these views on you. Rather, really, by the end of the course, I'm hoping you make up your own mind. Whether or not you change your mind in the course, you know, really up to you. Really, what I hope you get out of this is some interesting engagement. I hope you certainly get some food for thought. And by the end of the piece, I hope you have a more well-considered and clearly articulated view to this interesting, and what I think is a very important question. So with that, I'll go ahead and close this video. I encourage you to go ahead and read the introduction to our course reader. It's certainly still worth looking at in addition to what I've said here. And I'll be posting some more videos starting with Tolstoy and Quinn quite soon. Until then, bye for now.